Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, a new podcast where we share inspiring stories on a wide range of cultural and social issues worldwide. We also feature exclusive interviews and have creative contemporaries who are shaping culture in art, music, and fashion join us. So stay tuned because you never know who we'll have on the show. I'm the host and creator, Folasade Ologundudu, and thanks for listening. On this episode, we are joined by none other than Larry Ossei-Mensah, independent curator and co-founder of ArtNoir. We'll talk about COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement, why bold statements from big brands without actions to match are not acceptable, and how we change culture by putting in the work ourselves. Let's go. Okay, so first question. I noticed that you've been very active during COVID-19, reaching out to artists and having conversations on your platform, Virtual Visits, which you've created. Can you talk to me a bit about how that project came to be and what some of your goals have been with it?
So the project, the Virtual Visits, is something that was co-ideated with my co-founders at ArtNoir. So we're a collective. It's 7 of us. And a lot of our work is really to celebrate Black and Brown artists of all disciplines. And so once we kind of saw at least what was beginning to evolve with COVID-19 and sheltering in place, we wanted to find a way not only to stay connected to our artist community, but to just stay connected with our community in general. And one thing we were noticing is that everybody was kind of pretty much switching to digital because that was really one of the few outlets that you could really communicate. And so we thought it would be a great opportunity to educate people about various artists in our network and community. Let the artists educate our community, share about their practice, share how they're navigating, and help people understand that, although we're separate, we're going through this together in some
Absolutely.
regard. And also we wanted something that we can continue to do even when people are able to go back out and move freely. So it's something that's simple. It's every Thursday, 5 p.m., 5 to 5:30. And the artist normally takes about 20 minutes to just take people through their practice, what they're working on. And then we leave time for Q&A. And then, we've now been saving them to our IGTV. So it's another just
Amazing.
Great reference tool for people.
Sweet. I love that. I've also been a part of some of those sessions, and I've been there during the Q&As, and it seems sometimes for me that's the most fun part, right? It's where the artist kind of gets to let loose. It's where you also get to just speak your piece and talk about what you're thinking, what's important to you at the moment. So I found those Q&As to be really great. It's a way to get people really engaged.
Yeah, and I think we are always about creating a space that just feels intimate and safe, and that you can ask those questions, because I think what prevents a lot of people from participating in the arts from a patron standpoint or collector standpoint is the intimidation or feeling like, they don't fully understand when, I'm a believer that, Black folks naturally are creative, and it's just a matter of tapping into that and affirming that. And so I think these platforms that we've been able to create, the Q&A where there's no silly question, it's, these are things that you want to understand to help connect better with the artist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know you're from the Bronx, and a lot has been happening there, keeping the Bronx on the map in a major way as a cultural force, from the revitalization of the Bronx Museum to the work of Ghetto Gastro, which is really changing the way young POCs, people of color, and creative brands are interacting with food. How do you think the Bronx is continuing to solidify its place as a cultural reference point for new brands and creative innovation?
I mean, I think doing what we always do, out of all the other boroughs in the city, the Bronx, Brooklyn is kind of the one that's known, and I think one of that is just by population, because I think it's 2.5 million people in Brooklyn. But I think the Bronx, just its makeup, it's just kind of gritty, hustler's mentality, making something out of nothing, That's, and then also the melting pot of the community is, you have pretty much hip hop evolving out of, dance hall, I'll acknowledge like salsa, merengue, break beats, and then you have this thing called hip hop culture. So I think we've always been community driven, and I think we've seen what's happened in other boroughs. So we've seen what's happened in Harlem, Upper Manhattan. We've seen what's happened in Brooklyn in terms of like gentrification, shifts in demographic, and I think kind of being the last bastion, we've just been very assertive in not allowing that to just happen and not laying down and allowing that to happen, and really just protesting. There's a huge activist community here, because of the disproportionate, the income gap, the number of low income families here. Most people don't know that, like, for developers, I believe it's an 80-20 rule. And so a lot of low income housing has pretty much been dumped in the Bronx. And so that's kind of created a certain environment. And I think people are beginning to recognize that and utilize the different tools available to them, making our politicians accountable. There's some development that's happening in the South Bronx, and the communities are really trying to hold those developers accountable. So I think it's really asserting accountability, not taking things laying down. And if you're not with the program, you will get kicked out. So a great example is when I think New Museum tried to do their project in the Bronx, the Idea City, and really didn't do a good job of checking in and like getting the buy-in of like key stakeholders in the community. And when they tried to do it, it got shut down by the community.
Right.
Like,
can you give me a little background on that?
So Idea City is an initiative that the New Museum and some other partners started as a way to go into these communities and identify the different issues. And it's basically a day of, conversations, workshops, things of that nature. And so they were doing one in the Bronx. And, I don't know the truth to it, but there was like rumblings that it was partially supported by a developer, because it's not uncommon that developers will support initiatives. But I think for me personally, it's not an issue that the developer is supporting it. It's an issue that there isn't transparency, right? And so people will do things under the guise of community building, but not acknowledge where resources are coming. Again, I don't know if that's true in this case, but that's what was alleged. And then additionally, they just didn't get the right stakeholders involved, right? And people who they did start conversations with started backing out once they began to get a full picture, one. And then two, from my understanding, it was hastily put together. They didn't really like do the research, do the knowledge. And so, I think people in the community are just tired of like getting crumbs, like, and this is something that like it's happened in other cities. So it's not just singular to the Bronx, but like when they tried to do it, it got shut down within 20 minutes. And it was like, and so I think continuing those kind of efforts where it's like, if you're going to do something in the community, get the stakeholders who need to be involved, have the conversations, don't decide like tomorrow you're going to do something, like really build trust. Right. And I think also for any brand, brand or company or initiative, I think long-term. I think we're seeing that right now.
Absolutely.
Where a lot of brands are, trying to exhibit some sense of solidarity, whatever that may mean to the company. But it's like, it's great to start $100 million fund, but like, what happens when the $100 million is done? What is your timeline? So I think like what Brand Jordan did, I found to be interesting because they said, $100 million over 10 years. Or Stormzy's committed 10 million pounds over 10 years. Like kind of very specific things so that we can kind of measure like what these resources are doing and that people could be held accountable. To just kind of make a blanket statement, how are we ensuring that that money is being allocated properly? Who are the ones that are at the table deciding these things? And so I think anybody who's looking to work not only with the Bronx, but with communities like the Bronx, do the homework, do the research, make sure that there's, representation from the community, so that, this is an investment in the future and it's not just a marketing ploy, because I think people are seeing through that. And you're seeing a lot of brands like The Wing, for example, which, I've known for years was notorious for their terrible treatment of, women of color. And it's finally like coming to the fore where the CEO had to step down.
Wait, what happened with The Wing?
The CEO stepped down because like there's just been a history of just like mistreatment of, I know several women of color who've left the company because they just felt that it was a hostile, racist environment. And when these things would be voiced, it was kind of ignored or suppressed. And they've always positioned themselves to be a brand for all women, but that's just not the case, right? When you look at movements, like, I think about the suffrage movement. The suffrage movement really wasn't inclusive of Black women. And so, like, you just saw a lot of people who were just, like, fed up. And I think generally people are not holding their tongue anymore because I think we've just kind of been conditioned to kind of eat it, where, like, for me, that doesn't really make sense because, like, now you're dealing with that frustration, that trauma, that hostile work environment. You're not going to be able to execute at your highest level because you're in an environment where passive aggressive, discriminatory behavior is occurring and you just don't feel valued. And for me, that just doesn't make practical sense to be in an environment like that. But then I get it in that, people also just have basic needs. They got to pay their bills. They got to pay their rent. But I think also what COVID has done, because a lot of companies have had to contract staff, furlough staff, they see how dispensable they are, right? And so I think that's why you're seeing more people kind of speak up, and I've had numerous conversations with friends who are working in hostile work environments and they're trying to strategize. Well, I won't even leave it just to the companies because it's also the industries, So when we talk about structural, you're talking about the whole thing, right? You're talking about not only the companies, because the companies is this kind of like imaginary entity that has, its ways of standardizing things, removing empathy from things, and just making it about the bottom line, right? So I think now you're starting to see in the architecture space, it's been interesting to see like what's happening in the visual arts space, in sports. But for me, it's like, continuing to apply the pressure and don't like 6 months from now, we're like kind of back to normal. It's like, no, there really needs to be structural change. Not only like in the makeup of like representation in terms of employee, staff, executive, but also support. Because for me, it's not enough to say, all right, we're going to hire a bunch of Black execs, but if they don't have support, to kind of navigate just the challenges of working in these environments. I've talked to friends who like, their human resources department is kind of useless. So like in human resources is supposed to be the one safe space you can go to file a complaint. And I've unfortunately had friends and colleagues who can't do that because like they're complicit in the behavior.
That can be such a challenge. I want to switch gears a little, and stay on this topic, but ask you, how have you been personally feeling with the uprising of protests and marches, as a result of the recent death of Black people at the hands of police and because of white supremacy?
I think I've gone through a myriad of feelings. I mean, at first, because I'm past the point of like anger, because like,
yeah, agreed.
I'm past the point of anger. I think I was just like sad. I was disappointed. Because again, knowing how the structure works, even though you have like red-handed evidence of an occurrence of an incident that took the life of someone, that still has to go through a process. And there's still a potential that this person might be exonerated, even though you have red-handed evidence because the person is white, because the person works for the police. Right. Whereas if that person was a Black person, you would have seen such expediency in terms of how they would have been arrested, already indicted, and, they would have had to set a date for trial. So it's the disappointment within that. But then for me, it's also then beginning to think about what can I do within my resources, and understanding that like this issue is bigger than me and that I can't take on the weight by myself,
100%.
but through collaboration, and supporting initiatives that are doing the work, I can do my part and at least sleep at night knowing that, I'm doing the best I can with the resources, tools, and networks that I have available to me. One. But then I think also trying to identify the spectrum of issues, right? So like police brutality is one, systematic racism is one, but then looking at what are the branches that kind of stem from that. So I'm actually launching a project today, in about an hour or so. Actually, it's a project that I've
Amazing.
finally been doing, because cooking has basically been what's kept me calm, when it's built this routine. And so one day I kind of just recognized this roasting some vegetables in the oven is that it was making these imprints in the parchment paper, and I showed it to like a painter friend. I was like, "Oh, look what happened." And he was like, "Yo, that's dope." I'm like, "Really?"
That's art.
Yeah, and for me it's like I used to do photography. That was kind of like my beginning point in the arts, and I just never was really interested in like the critique, right?
Right.
And so I kind of stopped. And then so to kind of inadvertently create this thing, one, out of like a tool to kind of keep me sane, but then also two, to survive, just eat, self-care, but then like really be cognizant about what I'm putting in my body. So I collaborated with Pegasus Prints, and we're going to launch an edition of 50. It's called Parchment 40. It's also just something for me to just celebrate my 40th and just kind of be grateful that I'm here. And so it'll be
Yes.
edition of 50. It'll be $500, and then 20% of that money is going to go to two organizations. One is Co-Feed, and it's a food co-op that works with trans, queer communities.
Yay! I love that.
And then the other one is Some of Everything Community Art Center, which is Lauren Halsey's art project in South Central, and they provide free organic food to communities in South Central and Watts. And so for
Sick.
me, this project coming out of food, it just made sense to kind of give it towards initiatives that are trying to right the wrong with regard to access to just quality food consistently. So
Yeah, it's such a big part of the Black and Brown community, having
exactly.
access to quality food.
Exactly. And then, I think health, because I think that's like,
Of course.
for me, just been one of the key indicators that, like, when you look at, the unfortunate
COVID.
folks who are affected by COVID, it's between 50 to 70% Black and brown, and that's
Yeah, the
but I
numbers
mean,
are
even
staggering.
yeah, but I had a conversation with someone the other day, and even that's kind of complicated because, like, and I have to kind of fact check this, but they're telling me that there are actually people who are benefiting from, if somebody is unfortunately transitions and it's labeled COVID, I think there's additional monies that the hospital can get. So I have to fact check that information
That wouldn't
because a lot.
surprise me. It's America. Everything is about the
Yeah,
dollar. It's like, I
yeah,
mean, nothing is surprising anymore. It's like, what else
yeah.
are y'all gonna do?
Exactly. And then the thing is that, like, from my understanding, nobody dies from COVID specifically. It's a
Yeah, I
virus
get
similar to
right,
HIV, but
right.
it's triggering so many things. It's like almost as if it were designed for Black people, the eradication of Black people, which I wouldn't put past anybody. But at the end of the day, for me, it's just kind of fortified the importance of just kind of mental, physical, and spiritual health. Because that's
Yeah,
something that we
it's a
can control.
absolutely. And I think like it allows you to show up in the world as a better activist, as a better participant, right?
Exactly.
Like if you have all of that mental, physical, and emotional health when you step out the door every day, when you get bombarded with the racial injustice, when you get bombarded with the person at your job at the top of the food chain who's like, there are all these things happening covertly. We're not going to talk about them, and you feel you're holding that on, you take it in, you feel salty about it, and you can't say anything. I think when you come to the table more fortified, to your point, you are more able to speak up for yourself, and advocate for what you need. And I think, yes, a lot of people are not yet in that position, but you see that wave is happening by far and large.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
wanted to ask you another quick question. Just a few more things about like the activism and the racism and what's really going on right now. Do you feel like your work intersects with activism, and if so, how? And if not, how would you like activism to become a larger part of your work, and how might you see that developing in the future?
I mean, I think if you're a black person living in America,
Like your state of being is an act of like rebellion itself. Right.
exactly. So I mean, I
Yeah.
think, you know, I mean, but that's where like the importance of like mental health, physical health, spiritual health, that's also kind of a form of resistance because, like, living in this country and a lot of countries like America, you're kind of conditioned to be on the hamster wheel. You have to kind of like keep up with the Joneses in order to kind of be validated as a human. And
Yeah.
for me, we clearly know that's not true. And so I try to, I might not label it activism, but I just
Yes.
aim to be intentional with everything that I do
I
and
got you.
not do it for the sake of doing it because, one, it's my testimony. Because I always say, the work is your testimony, right? So
Yeah.
you're not going to really see me out there making a bunch of statements and speeches. It's kind of like, you just see in my behavior how I'm moving and where my alignment is, So
Right. Your
like
work
last
speaks
week,
for itself.
exactly. So like last week I did a project with this company Showfields and we raised, $1,300 for Black Lives Matter,
Wow.
which for me is
Amazing.
great, because that's not a check that I can just write, but through like, community and,
Yes.
and working
Yes. Through your
together,
work. Right.
we're able to support. So for me, I let the work be the testament. And
I
I
love
think as
that.
long as I'm being intentional and thoughtful with what I do, it's adding value, then that's, kind of my form of activism. I think what we
Definitely.
do with ArtNoir to just kind of uplift artists, black and brown artists, but then also uplift people who are interested in supporting those artists and being a
Right.
bridge, is a form of activism as well. So, I think,
Agreed.
yeah.
So, yeah, just adding more on to Art Noir, your nonprofit organization. So it sounds like, based on what you said and some of my own knowledge, is that you amplify not only Black voices from different parts of the art world, different sides of the art world, but perhaps other underrepresented voices in the industry as well. Do you think that your work allows you to shine light on Black and non-white artists?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always an opportunity to do that. I mean, black, Latinx, that's foundational. But I think we've also, collaborated with artists who are, Middle Eastern, East Indian.
Yeah.
To me, they're brown. So I'm very
Right.
expansive in that, in terms of, I think black, that's the foundation, but then like what
Yes.
kind of, are kind of the connective tissue to that. And so I think whether it's other represented groups, if it's, LGBTQI, it's really just our effort to push against this, this ideology that, the idea of whiteness, so not specifically whiteness, but the idea of whiteness is superior,
Yeah.
right? And really kind of just celebrating the abundance that just comes from our community because these are things that we've naturally done for thousands of years,
Right.
and kind of recognizing the value within that. I think that's very important, and to consistently do that.
Absolutely. Do you feel like what's happening with the uprising of protests around racial injustice will begin to create a positive change at the institutional level, like schools, foundations, mega brands, and government systems? You feel like it's a trend, or are we actually like in a phase of new awakening, new understanding?
I think we're in a phase of new awakening. I think it's definitely an inflection point,
Right.
but I mean, it's not something that's going to change overnight. I mean, you're talking about, hundreds of years of, you got to really kind of get to the root, and I was talking to someone and I think they were talking about this idea of rerouting. So we really got to kind of dig this thing up and replant new ideas, new initiatives, new structures. And then you have to plant that. I mean,
But
and
do you think
support
that
it and
that's
water it.
something? Do you think that like when you say we, do you think that that's something Black and brown people are charged with, or do you think that at this
Everybody,
point, okay, so that's a collective
everybody. That's
uprooting,
everybody.
right?
So we gotta, because what's been great about this moment is that everybody can get it, right? So you
Yeah,
saw Virgil,
yeah, I
get
saw
it,
that. I saw
you
that.
know, and my hope is that that's an awakening for him.
Well,
Although he talks
everybody's
about,
coming for
being a
everybody
black man.
else.
Well, well, the thing is this, right? And I have to do my research, but using Virgil as an example, people that I know who work in fashion, they say this black man has little to no Black people working with him, right? So it's like, for me, that's just kind of a hard pill to swallow, where like you're in a space of privilege, you're in a space to open up doors. And obviously, I don't know everything that he does behind closed doors, but we live in a world of perception and optics, right? So if you're like first men's designer, Black men's designer, LVMH is like, it's a holding company of a bunch of different houses, and you're just not doing what you can do within your sphere of influence. That's a problem, right?
Yeah,
And
therefore you are
so,
complicit. It's
yeah,
just
exactly.
that simple.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think he has also benefited, because if you look at like the majority of his consumers, they're young white people.
Right.
And so, but I won't negate that he has made gestures. I mean, if you look at like his first show, just like the makeup of the models, you know, shows that, he has an awareness. But it's just like, you can't be careless, right? Like if that was anybody else posting $50, no one would care, right? But I think, the world is watching you. We unfortunately look to these individuals for guidance when they're human like everybody else. And there just isn't going to be a lot of latitude for mistake, so it's
Right.
better you say nothing, or just are conservative in your approach until you really figure out what it is you want to do.
Right.
But the long and short of it is that, like, it hasn't got to the point where it feels like people are just like dangerously calling people out. They're calling people out, and they're pulling the receipts.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, we have to hold everybody accountable.
Especially ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, and I think
I mean,
it's
how many
kind of a
times?
50.
Right. How many times? I'm just like, how many times are you in a room and like you see something go down and it's like, but that's not right. And how many
Yeah,
times do we remain silent? How many times have I in my life, 33-year-old woman, have I remained silent about things that I saw that were wrong? For who? Who benefited from my silence? No one. Certainly not
exactly.
me. So, it's one thing to check someone like Virgil. Great. I get it. And respect, whatever. But it's also important to check yourself. And I think that's
Of
where
course.
leadership really begins. Now, he had to come back on that statement, right? He had to come back on that post about like the cats from Miami and like putting up the $50 match donation. I think that was a good choice. He had to say something about it. But if what you say is true, that he's a man at his level and doesn't have people of color working close to him, the handwriting is on the wall. If that is proof, I don't need any more proof. Like, if that is true, I don't need any more proof. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. But
It's
again,
not
that's alleged. I don't know, but I
right.
think at the end of the day, that's why, like I said, in terms of like, your other question, like I start with what I can do,
Yes.
and as long as I do my part, then I can be, I wouldn't say satisfied, but I know I'm doing my part,
Yes.
right? And so I
Agreed.
think the more people look at themselves and start there, and do that work, and I think there's a lot of internal work that I think just sheltering in place is just force people to do if they've embraced that. I think people need to just kind of do this internal work, this deep look at
Oh,
themselves as humans, as
right. The deep
individuals.
dive.
Yeah, and so the long and short of it, this is definitely an inflection point. You have people who are scared. You have people who are nervous. You have businesses that if they're not, it's like Color Purple. If you don't do right by us, everything you do is gonna be cursed,
Right.
and we just need to keep that same energy. Like we and it's unfortunate, because exhaustion is real, but we got
Totally.
to keep that same energy. We got to apply that same pressure that they apply to us, so that they know that this isn't a joke.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's a wrap. That was our episode with Larry Ossei-Mensah. I want to give a big shout out to Larry and the folks over at ArtNoir for putting in the work to share the talent and excellence of Black and Brown artists from across the globe through their 501c3 nonprofit. For more information on Larry, you can check him out on his IG account at Young Global, And you can learn more about ArtNoir at ArtNoir Co. The links are also going to be available in the description box of this podcast. Check us out on our next episode. We're going to feature another special guest and get into it more on issues of culture, work, health, and finding joy through uncertainty. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love, y'all. This episode was recorded in beautiful New York City with me and LES and Larry live from the BX. Our music has been mixed and produced by Leon Kojo, and our audio has been edited by our in-house team here at Lightwork. You can learn more about Kojo's skills on the 1 and 2s in the link to his SoundCloud in the description box of this podcast. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, conversations on culture and current events with some of today's most exciting creative contemporaries.